Ask me. All right. Well. So do you want to start letting people in, Kat? Just look who it is. I guess we can see everybody. Okay. Look who it is. I see familiar faces. I see familiar faces. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. Okay, gonna give it a minute for everybody to get in the room. Hi. Oh, by the way, happy birthday, Charlie. It's Charlie's birthday.
Happy birthday, Charlie.
Thank you. I made it to 58.
Level 58.
Level 58 in the game of life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's level.
It is. It's level. We
Okay.
don't count. When you get over a certain age, you don't count years, you count levels. And then you get to pat yourself on the back like, hey, made it to level 58.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Maybe.
Hi. Hi, Warwick.
I'm going to pin.
Hey guys, I just landed at 4:30 this morning from Accra, Ghana.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Are you back in the US?
Yeah.
Wow. Your pictures are amazing. Thanks for sharing them.
Oh, thank you. What a trip.
Yeah, Ghana. Wow. Like that's on the bucket list. You've been to South Africa, right?
Me?
No, I was sorry, Warwick. Have you been?
Or
Yeah, I've been to South Africa. Tyler's been to Ghana. He went to Ghana when he was in college. He went on a volunteer medical brigade thing. They went there and they were setting up medical things for communities. And it was funny. He wasn't a doctor. He's not a doctor now, but he was able to write prescriptions. So the kids would come in and they would have, there was one particular thing that was quite common. And so if they come in with these symptoms, write a prescription for this. So Tyler was writing prescriptions for these kids in Ghana.
That's crazy.
Not strictly legal, but anyway.
Play a doctor on TV. So, all right. So I know a lot of the people joining today know exactly who my guest is, maybe big fans, but I thought I would just take a minute to introduce Warwick to everyone. So Warwick Schiller, thank you for being here. Warwick Schiller is an internationally celebrated horseman, author, and creator of the wildly popular Journey On podcast. In 2020, when the world was dealing with a pandemic and public horse clinics were no longer an option, Warwick's wife, Robin, suggested he do a podcast. Not wanting to do just another horse training podcast, instead he invited his audience to join him as he walked his own road of transformation. He shared personal stories and followed his curiosity by inviting on guests he found intriguing. The rabbit holes he went down and the realness and honesty of the conversations drew in listeners from around the world. It wasn't long before the podcast was raking in millions of downloads. This led to starting the annual Journey On Podcast Summit and hosting retreats at the Journey On Ranch. Now, I was lucky enough to be a guest on the podcast, and full disclosure, I've considered Warwick and Robin friends ever since. Warwick has been featured in dozens of newspapers and magazines, from Horse and Rider to the New York Times. He's been in documentary films like Rescued Hearts and is featured in an upcoming doc called Rekindle. I'm excited to have him join us today because even though we have spent a good deal of time together, it's all been in an environment where we're doing stuff, right? Like we were on a retreat, or we were in a retreat, or we were at the summit, or maybe on his, when I was on his podcast. But there was always a lot going on, and I realized that I'd like to know more about work, and I had questions, which brings us here. So thank you for being here and welcome.
I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited anytime I get to hang with you, Christine. So it's cool.
Well, same. So,
Who's your copywriter for my bio? Because I like that one. I might have to.
oh, I just made it up this morning.
Okay. I might,
Yeah, I'll
I
send it.
might have to steal that. It's weird listening to that, really, because I'm like, huh, that guy sounds really cool.
Isn't it weird when you hear your edification by somebody else, and there's like, wait, who's that guy?
Yeah, it's interesting.
So
Because you don't kind of, well, I don't view myself that way. Like that's not, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's interesting to listen to that.
to listen and not squirm.
Oh, I was squirming, don't worry.
I saw your smile at one point. I was like, oh, we're going here. Okay. But I thought that I would just tell the story real fast of how you and I met the very first time.
But I thought you were an actress.
Yes. Yes. Because I had a friend who was also a horse trainer, and she was training me how to ride, like, improving my riding. And she said her and her friend were going to a horse expo in Pomona. And I said, oh, I'd love to go too. So I tagged along, and she was, walking real fast to get in there because she's like, there's only one person here that I really want to see, and that's Warwick Schiller. And I had no idea who Warwick Schiller was. So we get in there, and I was blown away because not because I knew so much about horses. I was very green. I would very much in the beginning of my horse journey, where I actually had a horse, not where I dreamed of a horse or rode someone else's horse. So at the time, I was just hired at Passages in Malibu to be on staff on the clinical team doing hypnotherapy with people who had come to help break their dependency on drugs and alcohol. And so here I am at the horse clinic, and this guy's talking about all of this stuff that all I can think about is this applies to people. This applies to people. And work, you were talking about things that apply to people and how it applied to horses. And I was learning about things to apply to people by you using those things to apply to horses. So like you told the story about Robin using cognitive behavioral therapy to be able to deal with her panic attacks, and how she had to sit when she was feeling good and not panicked, work to bring up a low level of panic, and then work to release it. And how you were on a plane trip, and that do you want to tell that story about how you fell asleep? Like you always fall asleep because it's like the time that you're actually offline is on a plane.
Yeah, it's interesting because the little cognitive behavior therapy thing that Robin did was, someone told her, and I think it had to do with show ring nerves. But like one day, when you're completely relaxed, sit down, close your eyes, and make yourself a little bit concerned about something, and then do box breathing till you're relaxed again. And I think when she first started doing it, it would take her probably 15 minutes to get from slightly concerned back to relaxed again. And then she got to where she could sit down, think about something that made her a little upset, and just one round of box breathing, she was back again. And then she kind of forgot about doing it. But she's always suffered from panic attacks, and she wasn't doing this to help her with the panic attacks. But she'd never had and she's a nervous flyer, but she'd never had a panic attack on a plane, which would be a good thing because I think they'd have to duct tape her to the seat or put her in a straitjacket if she had one on. If you're driving a car and you have a panic attack about being in a car, you can pull over. You can't pull the plane over. And if you're having a panic attack about, I don't know if anybody's ever done this, but if you really think about the reality of being in a metal tube 30,000 feet above the ground, your mind can go strange places. So you kind of just blah, blah, blah it out sort of thing. And so if she'd had a panic attack on a plane, she would have had a complete, absolute meltdown. And she did that little exercise you're talking about, I don't know, probably maybe 4 or 5 months before this, and had stopped doing it. And we were in Canada flying from, I think it was Calgary to Toronto, maybe a couple of hour flight. And I always, I sleep on planes, so I fall asleep before it takes off and I wake up when it lands. And when we landed, I woke up and I looked at her and she looked just a little bit pale. And I was like, "Are you okay?" She goes, "Yeah, I had a panic attack." And I'm like, up to this point in time, Robin's panic attacks were 2 hours of "I'm going to die." And I'm like, "Did you?" And she goes, "Well, actually, I didn't. I started to have one, then I did that box breathing thing that I practiced months ago, and it went away." And that's the first time she'd ever de-escalated a panic attack her entire life. It should have been the worst one she ever had. And the skills that she developed when she wasn't having a panic attack, she didn't even know she was going to use them when she was having a panic attack. Yeah, so that's how that story goes down. And for me, it's so applicable to helping people with horses that, when you're doing some of the basic groundwork stuff, you're working on emotionally regulating the horses, but the situation hasn't arisen yet. You don't know if it's going to be, a motorbike out on the trail or who knows, panic attack on a plane. You don't know what it's going to take care of, but it's going to take care of things.
I also love about an extra piece of that story that came about over the following years was the thing we were trying to get rid of, right? Which was the anxiety and the panic attacks, actually became a curiosity, which then became a passion of not only being able to figure it out for herself, but then finding all these ways to help other people. And I was, last night I went to this event where there was 2 speakers and they were both in marketing and they both have like 1 million or so followers. And it was kind of like a live filming of a podcast. And I'll see if I can get it and share it. But that's a big thing they talk about everything has a plus and a minus to it. Even if you won the lottery, right? People be like, that's nothing but a plus. But if you ask them, well, what are the detractions from winning the lottery? Well, now everybody wants money from me, right? Now I don't know who's around because of me, who's around because of the money. I'm more of a target for scams or, there's so many things. Like there's more responsibility, there's more taxes, there's more things to deal with, right?
And the one that nobody thinks of is most people think if I had enough money, I'd be happy. And if you win the lottery, win a lot of money, and then you've got this bank account that says all these numbers, and then you're still miserable, that sucks. Because then you're like, shit, I thought money would make me happy, and now what? You know what I mean? Yeah. As Mike Tyson says, anybody that thinks having a lot of money will make you happy ain't never had a lot of money.
Well, now, okay. So this brings me, I'll get back to the first meeting story, but this brings me to something that I just saw where it was a clip from a Huberman Lab podcast episode. And
That's my wife's boyfriend, by the way.
okay, okay.
And
Um,
I
is she
gotta clarify.
pass? Is she
What's
her
that?
one pass that she gets? Is that
No. He's not a hall pass because there's quite a chance in the circles I'm in that she actually might get to meet him. So she can't. I was just about to say that's her boyfriend, but it's not her hall pass. You know, you only grant the whole pass to someone you think they're never ever going to come in contact with.
Exactly. Well, so this gentleman that I cannot remember his name, he was on there and he was talking about this. There's this whole theory, and it's a mouthful, so I'm certainly not going to remember that. But the theory was that we are programmed to find what's wrong with everything.
Yeah, we
We're
have a
we're
negativity bias. Yeah.
Yes, we're programmed for struggle. So what happens is when all that happens is, let's say I have a bunch of problems, right? And let's say everybody would say on paper, those are some real problems. And then they all get handled. I'm not now problem free. What happens is my psyche adjusts and it makes smaller things bigger problems than they actually are, so that I can stay in the problem mode. And it's wild to think about that when you start to study the brain and you realize how many things that you think are real aren't actually real. And that's one of them. So when we think like, only if I, in this case, got money, like if I had more money or the money issue, I would be happy. Well, no, you're just going to adjust. You might be happy for a bit, sure, of course, and more money gives you more tools in your toolbox, but it doesn't take away that automatic draw back to looking for where the problem is. So back to us meeting. That was the first one, was the CBT. The second one was the story about the rabbits.
Was I telling the rabbit story back then?
You were.
Okay.
And you were
Okay.
telling, and you even had the little accent for the British
Yeah,
girl.
the British girl.
Said
Yeah.
to you, I'm hacking out, and
Okay. See, I didn't really, I totally forgot about, and I didn't forget where we met, but I was just thinking about it while you were talking. And this was at the very, very beginning of me starting down some of those rabbit holes. This was probably 2017, was it? Was it 17?
2017.
Wow. Yeah. So that's, yeah. So yeah, that was
You.
that was kind of the beginning of me, looking at things differently. And I'd always explain things differently, like so many horse people, they just keep it at horse stuff, like at a horse expo, they're only talking about horses. Whereas I'd always been explaining things, I was good at analogies and, drawing comparisons to things that people already knew in other parts of their life. I just, I guess I had a viewpoint of the world, right? A perspective on the world then that was a certain perspective, and that's kind of changed. But I was still using other analogies like Robin and the plane and the panic attack on the plane and the rabbit sort of thing to explain things to people. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, it's, and in fact, it's funny because it's so burned into my brain that first time of seeing you, because it was like that when the student is ready, almost. It was like everything that you were saying, I was primed to hear. And I think this had just recently happened to you because I think you were demonstrating it with the horse you had with you, which was, you said you were at a clinic and you went to walk around the other side of a horse, and the horse had turned its head, and you kind of just moved past and you were doing whatever you were doing. And then the woman came up to you after and said, when you went around that horse was saying no, that it wasn't comfortable with you being on that side. And that now and I think you said you spent 45 minutes or something asking the horse permission in the next clinic or at some other time to go to the other side before finally the horse let down and was okay. And how hard that is to do in clinics because people are there to see all this big wild things happening with horses, and you're just standing there asking a horse permission to walk to its other side for 45 minutes. Does that ring any bells to you?
I it was all around this time, so I'm not sure that what order. I didn't think that like I think you're talking about the Mustang at the clinic in Texas, and I don't think that had happened yet. What month might this have been? Actually, if it was in the summer.
I think it was either in the summer or the fall.
Okay, well, yeah, 2017 is about when that happened. Oh, all the strange things started happening in 2017. So yeah, so it could have been
That
then.
that was, and you said, so there was those things, but the thing about the rabbits that was so relevant was the idea, and then I started hearing other versions of it from other people. But this idea, like if you imagine we have a cup inside of us, and that cup is the amount of stress and anxiety that we can hold and still function. And this idea of, you used rabbits, of putting rabbits in that cup. But at some point, the cup is full, and anything else that goes in is overflow. Now you're over threshold. So when you're talking to people who have been managing their over threshold with drugs or alcohol, even turning on that lens to be able to notice, is my cup getting full? What can I do to take some of those rabbits out of my cup? That is really helpful. And the analogy is so simple that there's beauty in the simplicity of it. So anyway, oh, you did say something that was really funny, and I literally had my jaw on the ground and giggling at the same time, because, and I'm going to butcher this because I don't remember how you said it way better than me.
I'm kind of shuddering as to what I may have said way back in
I know you are.
2017. Like, I'm sorry for anything I may have said in a previous iteration of me.
But it was what I had been seeing, and I was like, oh my God, did he just say that? But it needed to be said. So you're talking in front of the group, and then you said something about, a need to control, to dominate. And you said something about, ladies, when, you're angry and you show up at the barn, and then you're like, this guy, I'm going to make him do this or something like that. But you said it so much better, but it was just kind of like, I was like, whoa, he just called out his audience. Like, that's hilarious. But it was also true, right? Now, maybe you'd say it differently now.
I'm pretty sure I would.
but at the time, I thought, I can trust this guy. I can trust this guy because you know what? He's not, what he's saying is what he believes. And he's going to say what he believes is true, whether he loses people or not. And he's here to wake people up, and he's here to shake things up, but he's also humble enough to bring people in on his own journey of his own growth. And I think that's something that we rarely see.
Well, at that time, there wasn't a lot of growth yet. It was just starting. So,
Well, I don't know. Like, what I saw was very impactful, and it wasn't what obviously I didn't watch everyone or know every horse trainer or anything like that, but it spoke to me. I mean, I was hooked from that day. So then we had to go to your booth because my friend Belinda was like, we have to go I want to go talk to work. And that was the funny part, because that's when we were standing in line and you were like, I'm in line. I'm probably 4 or 5 people back, and Warwick's poking his head around like, hey. And I was like, this is looking behind me. I was like, this guy's really super friendly. I thought, wow, okay. And then it turns out that you thought that what show were you watching?
I was watching Deadwood.
Deadwood. Anyway, Warwick thought I was Kim Dickens, which I am not, but it led to a kind of funny conversation starter. And then, but the good thing about that was that I think it made him remember me. So when I did go to his clinics and stuff, we'd always have like a little, hey, how you doing?
Well, it wasn't till you came to a clinic in Arizona and I got talking to you there, and that's when you said you did the hypnotherapy. And so I didn't know much about you on our first meeting. And then I remember you telling me that, and I was like, whoa, that's super interesting. What's funny about the Kim Dickens thing is we were watching a TV, Rob and I were watching a TV show recently. And so Deadwood was made probably in the late 2000s. It's probably made about 2008, something like that. Rob and I were recently watching a TV show, so that's 16, 17 years on from when Deadwood was made. And there was this lady in this TV show, and I said to Robin, this lady reminds me of Christine. And she goes, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. And I look up the cast and I'm like, oh shit, it's Kim Dickens, 17 years on from when I first saw her in Deadwood. So she still reminds me of Christine.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment. So that was the beginning. And, you talk a lot
I do.
recently. No, well, full stop. But you do talk a lot about doing things without a personal gain in mind, right? To do something just because it's something that you're interested in doing, it's something kind or good or helpful to someone else, and just following those breadcrumbs that show up in your life. And one of the most amazing, fun, awesome things that ever happened to me was being invited on your podcast. And the reason that I look at that as one of the biggest things I ever manifested was because during the pandemic, when we weren't having these great conversations with people, we weren't really having social interaction, and I was actually working a ton during that time. But you started the podcast, I think, in July of 2020, and I was hooked on that podcast because it felt like I was in the room. I was in the room I wanted to be in. Like, this was my mastermind group, right? These people were the people that I was interested in talking to. And
think about that was before you even had anything to do with it, and think about the connections you've made since. And
oh my God.
oh
my God, like so much of my life today is bloomed out of you, thankfully, starting that podcast. But I hung on to those. Like, I looked forward to those so much. And I would talk out loud a lot of times. You would say, I just read this book, and I would be like, like, my favorite book, or I just read that book too, or oh my gosh, I gotta talk to this guy. Like, we could have the best conversation. I know we could. And one day, it was when you had Stevie Delahunt on, and you were talking about Rick Doblin and MAPS and his work in bringing psychedelics into the realm of healing for people with trauma and PTSD, and you just were so interested in how you had met somebody who had worked with Rick Doblin and all of this. And I thought, oh my God. So my friend Will, who I met because we were both working with a client. And so we worked together with the client, and they invited him to come out with the horses. And then he started taking lessons, and he's like, and then he went down his own horse journey. But Will, his mentor is Rick Doblin, and Will's been on Goop. He's been on a lot of different conferences because he specializes in psychedelics and psychiatry. And I thought Warwick has to have Will on. Like that's like, when the 6 degrees of separation, that's 1 degree of separation from Rick Doblin. It's everything that he's talking about right now. So I reached out to Warwick to be like, hey, here's this guy. Let me tell you, he went to Harvard, all this stuff, and I think he's perfect. And Warwick's like, whoa. But why does he want to talk to me? And I was like, of course he wants to talk to you. Like, I don't think that you knew the impact that your podcast was having and how that podcast had been leveling you up in ways that maybe it's hard to tell during a pandemic and you're just talking to a screen and then it goes out into the ether. But it turned out that after I sold, like I had talked to him about him going on and got his okay first to present him to you. And then when you said yes, then he started getting nervous because of how excited I was that he was going to be on your podcast. He's like, I'm never nervous about being on a podcast. Like, now I'm suddenly nervous about this podcast. So because of that, because I was like, these two guys need to be connected. When you came to town, I think you were in Palos Verdes, and you were doing a clinic, and you and Will became friends. And then you went to see Will, and then you invited Will to the clinic. Now, Will doesn't have a horse at this point, but so Will reached out to me and was like, hey, are you going to go? I'm thinking about going. I'm like, yeah, let's meet up there. So we did. And because I'm sitting next to Will, you came over and talked to both of us. And then within 30 seconds of talking, we're like in we went right into some deep, like existential conversation. And then you were like, whoa, like shake your head. And you're like, okay, wait, I think I have to start this clinic now. So we'll talk more later. And you turned around, you walked over and you put your hands on the arena fencing and you stopped in that. If anybody has been around work, the freeze, and he's thinking about something. You just stopped with your arms on the fence. And then you slowly turn your head around and looked me dead in the face. And you went, can I talk to you for a minute? And so I went up to the fence and you're like, I'd like to have you on my podcast. And I went into what at that time was my automatic response, because this is what went into my head. Oh my God, he doesn't know about my past. And he asks people about their past. And all I saw was this vision of me being on your podcast and you asking me about my past, and then thinking, oh crap, who the hell is this I got on my podcast? Like, whoa, this is not what I imagined or would want. And just like, I was going to ruin your credibility with your audience. I was going to, like, it's crazy, all of the things that fled. So I remember I was like, I hesitated for a minute and I was like, I'd love to, but we should talk first. And then I think you took that as like, I wasn't sure I wanted to be on. So you're like, well, you don't have to. And I was like, no, wait, that's not what I'm saying. And then we never did get to talk first. So it all worked out how it was supposed to. But that was kind of the trajectory of how one breadcrumb at a time led to me being invited to be on your podcast, which was phenomenal.
Can I just say something about the podcast? Because you said something a minute ago about, I forget what you said about it. It made me think, I was talking to someone about this recently, is the thing about the podcast is there aren't any comments. And so you don't get feedback. I mean, I get feedback from people, but you don't get, it's not like social media where and I read comments and I probably shouldn't, but because there's no comment section, it's almost like I'm free to say what I think, not, oh, I shouldn't say that because the last time I said that, everybody got mad at me, because there's no feedback from it. And so you get to be, pretty authentic about what you think about. And like where I get feedback on the podcast mostly like is at horse expos or whatever, and people come up and, they say, you listen to the podcast, changed my life or whatever. But you don't have people come up and say, you know what, I listened to your podcast and it sucked. Like they don't bother doing that because you're right there. Social media, there's the wall of this. You can be a keyboard warrior and say all the bad things. And so it's, because I've had some interesting people on the podcast. I had one lady, Dr. Alison Brown, who channels some sort of alien entity. I mean, it's gotten...
it goes out there.
It goes out there, but yeah, there's something about I wouldn't say the anonymity of the podcast, but it almost stops my people pleasing from coming up, because I just don't get you don't get the negative feedback. I guess they just don't listen.
Well, I think one of the attractions of the podcast is that it does feel like you're just having a conversation with someone, and that you're not trying to lead it in any direction or shape it, but you're just leading with your curiosity. So that allows for you to have all kinds of people on, right? It's not that you're saying this is the way or this is the truth. It's that I find this interesting. Let's talk to this person who does these things, and let's find out more, because really it's not even a I want to find out more. I'm going to record it and then you guys can listen to it, is what it feels like. But that's where the authenticity comes in.
Yeah, but the whole podcast I've been very lucky to, the first guest I had on that really made me think about, I want to have more conversations like that, was Jane Pike. A number of you on here have been in the presence of Jane. And so you guys know what that's like. But yeah, when I had Jane on, then it's like, oh no, I want to have more conversation like that. She was the one that really kind of steered it in where it ended up going to.
Well, that's like starting with a grand slam, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was.
But you had talked about in the first few episodes, talked about how you ended up being in America, how you ended up doing some
well, the first few episodes, because if you think about the podcast, like many of the amazing things that happened in my life, were Robin's idea. But she said, why don't you do a podcast? And Robin used to listen, back in the day, she used to listen to Dr. Laura.
Oh, I remember.
If you guys don't know who Dr. Laura is, Dr. Laura was I didn't even know what sort of doctor she was. I don't think she was a psychiatrist, but she had this talk show that people would call in, and she would give them her opinions on what they should be doing in their life. I'm not even sure she was actually qualified to be doing that, but she was anyway. Robin said, what if you had this like call-in show? Like, you know, you wouldn't do it live, but you'd talk to one person, then talk to another person, get enough people, but they, you know, they're talking to what horse problem you got. And I said, well, I could do that. I could answer their horse problems, but first, for the most part, when people have horse questions of me these days, first I have to get them to have the perspective I have. Otherwise, my answers won't make any sense to them or won't work. If they do what I tell them to do with a different perspective, it won't work. So, you know, because any physical, especially with horses, but any physical thing you are doing, the outcome of it will only work if you have the right energy and intention behind it. And so the first episode was called Changes. And it was like, okay, so this is the way this is what I used to do with horses, and this is, you know, kind of what I do now, and this is why. These are the changes I've made in my mostly perspective. And then after that episode, I was like, nope, that wasn't enough. I need to do another one. And the second episode was called The Science of Connection. So it was about polyvagal theory and about that sort of thing. And I got through those two episodes, and then I still don't think we had another guest. And then I think I had an episode talking about Robin and I going to the World Equestrian Games in 2018.
How to manifest a car crash. When did that one?
That was
After?
somewhere not long after that.
Ah.
So at this point in time, I'm still thinking I'm going to do the Dr. Laura thing. And then I had Jane on there, and then it was like, okay, there's enough horse training stuff out there. I want to have conversations like that with people. So and then you know, people that I knew, I started, you know, people that I knew, I started having them on there. People that, and mostly they were horse people, but it wasn't, we weren't talking about horses at all, but they were people who had a different perspective on life. And basically I wanted to unravel. I just clicked on it here. So the first one was Changes. The second one was The Science of Connection. Then the third one, I actually talked to a guy named Joe Ellis from South Africa, because he's the guy who wrote the theme song. The fourth one was Books That Have Influenced Me. Once again, I'm trying to get people to see the perspective. So I'm still kind of leading up to doing the Dr. Laura thing. The next one was World Equestrian Games. The next one was Tyler and I talking about riding camels in Mongolia. And then was Jane Pike. And then was Tristan Tucker. And then was Elsa Sinclair. And then there was Mustang Maddie. Then was How to Manifest a Car Crash. And then was Tina Kindersley, Tick Maynard, then Barbara Schulte, and Nashon Cook. And probably Nashon was one of those game changers to where, holy cow, you know what I mean? Dr. Steve Peters was right after that, and then Leslie Desmond, then Jonathan Field, then Dr. Susan Fay, and et cetera, et cetera. And then it kind of, you know, from there, we went on to, you know, I kind of knew where we were going to. Like, I want to talk to people who have a different perspective on the world.
You know what's interesting is that Nishan his writings were being, like, I was reading his writings on Facebook. I don't know who was sharing them, but a lot of people were like, it just, they took off like wildfire. And I remember thinking when I read what he was writing, this guy's got to be on that Warwick guy's podcast, because these two guys they're operating in the same field.
When I read How I Got Nashon on the podcast, someone shared something that he wrote. I read that and I'm like, I just read the one thing and I'm like, don't know who this guy is, but I got to get him on the podcast. So I knew nothing about him at all. And, you know, when I got him on the podcast, I said, so tell us, what do you do in the world? And then he opened his mouth and spoke for about 10 minutes. And then my jaw was on the floor and I'm like, wow, that was profound. And then the whole thing was profound, you know. But yeah, it's been quite, I wouldn't say weird. It's been very interesting that it's just, you know, there's been an energy to it. I was thinking about this morning, nothing to do with being on here with you, but I was thinking about how, You can have like say musicians, you can have a band and they're not actually that good. Like the lead singer's voice is not that good or whatever, but it works for them. And you can have other people who are way more talented than them and can sing better or whatever, and the stars don't line up. And it's almost like there's this cosmic plan, and if you fit into it and you don't fit into it or whatever, and obviously that the universe wanted that whatever the message is coming through the podcast to come through, and it kind of set it up so it could come out. But it's yeah, it's just interesting how things work out, and like I said, some people who are way more talented at a certain thing don't become successful in that, and other people who may not have as much talent, they do, and it's just like all the stars have to line up. You can have most of them, but if you don't have all of them, it doesn't work.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking that one of the things that in many ways we're taught to not do in business and in the world, like you don't want to be too vulnerable, or not, maybe that's not it. You don't want to say or do anything that allows people to put you in a box, or activates people. So so much is trying to be everything to everyone. And the people, I think, who not only make the biggest impact, but the people that follow them really, really trust and engage with them are the people who are authentic. And that means that you have to say things that might come back and bite you in the ass. Because I look at your career, and even today I say things and I go, I might not agree with this 5 years from now. I might look back at what I believe now and be like, oh, I wouldn't say that anymore. And you said that earlier when we were joking about, the 2017 Expo. And so, since one of my biggest fears that I had to confront when going on your podcast was the fear of being seen, the fear of being judged, you're out of the box now. How do you, because I don't think it's in the nature of our nervous system to be able to process and handle feedback and energies and opinions from the thousands of people around the world, that once you get to a level of being known that you're dealing with, I don't think that our nervous systems are really equipped to deal with that. So how do you think that you have dealt with, there's all these videos out there that you put out that you don't do those things anymore? This is going to be a two-part question. Okay. So there's the part of how do you deal with, because you're fine, they're out there, and like you're fine with them being out there. This is your evolution. But then you said something in your last podcast update about letting go of when people misunderstand you. And oh man, that's like the hardest one for me. The one that I think you nailed what I am the most afraid of. I'm not the most afraid of people disliking me or hating me for what I think, who I am, what I believe. Like, I know that that's going to happen. No, none of us are for everybody. And people have a lot of opinions. We all do. But it's the idea that they misjudged or misheard or misunderstood me. That's the fear. And you said that you have allowed this person that, you know, came up to you to give you some pointers, you allowed them, you realized that they just really didn't get what you were doing. And instead of spending all this time trying to convince them or maybe bristling about it or being frustrated by it, you just, okay, thanks, and let it go. So I know that that wasn't always the case because of, you've talked about that, like you've talked about, you know, having moments, especially more, I think, with online, you know, where people all of a sudden you feel attacked. And look, that does happen. Like people do say a lot of things online that they would never say to a person's face, and it can be activating. But I know I'm going off on a tangent. I want to get back. So the question is like, how has that part of your journey, where do you feel like you're at now? What has been the biggest struggles with that?
Where I'm at now, well, you know, the instant that I talked to about in the last podcast, where I was at a horse expo, and there was another presenter at the horse expo who felt the need at the end of the horse expo to come up and tell me how I'm doing it wrong. And he said, you know, you're causing these horses to whatever, which is totally incorrect. And this is not, I'm right and he's wrong. I understand it enough to where I don't know where he's getting his information from. Maybe he's getting it secondhand, I don't know, but he, you know, he lives in another country, so he doesn't get to see what I do, and he's certainly not a subscriber and see the whole thing. So I said, yeah, thanks for your input or whatever. But just recently, I've had some experiences or done some things or whatever, you know, doing the work to where I now kind of have a little more faith in me. So, you know, I'm a little less concerned about other people's thoughts of me. And this is just this is a very recent change that I've noticed things kind of bounce off me. You know, I've been working on having this bubble around me and being very cognizant of what I let in and what I deflect. And you know, one of them, I have a really good therapist who's really helped me with that. But you got a part in this, Christine, because you turned me on to a guy named Terry Real. And Terry Real, in his book Fierce Intimacy, he talks about having a bubble around you like an orange. You know, there's the outer peel of the orange, the orange stuff, and then there's the white stuff on the inside. And about what you let in, what you don't let in. And you know, basically, if someone says something, is that true for me, or is that just their opinion? And if it's their opinion, well, but if it's true for me, you let it in and you have to think about it. And I think over the years, I've learnt as much from my detractors on social media than I have from my admirers. Well, I don't think I've learnt that much from my admirers. Well, I suppose what you learn is, yes, you're on the right track because this resonates with a lot of people. And then there's the detractors, but you kind of got to, I think you've got to be able to sort through from your detractors what's their shit and what is actually true that I really should think about doing that thing. And over the years, because I've always read every comment because I've had this people-pleasing tendency, but you do read all the comments, and if there's enough of them that kind of ring true, you start to get them. And that's been one of the things that's helped me take a different path. There was a lot of different things. That wasn't one thing, but the comments of some people who, you know, these comments that have been very, very similar, and it seems like it's not their stuff projected on me, but it sounds like it's something I should think about. I think they've helped. But just lately, probably in the last, this year really, the last 6 months, I've done some things to where I now, how would I put this? You know, I now trust me a bit more rather than trust other people's opinions of me. And it's been a funny shift to observe from the inside. But yeah, there's been some there's just been some situations to where I've handled completely differently. And looking back, I'm like, oh, that's because I suppose respect might be the word. I respect me a little more than I used to, which is, it's relying less on external validation, I think. And that's probably the word I would use. I probably respect me a little more than I used to. I got a ways to go yet, but
Do you have any examples that you would be willing to share of finding threads in some of the detractors' comments that
yes,
you sat with?
yeah. This is a long time ago, but say my horse Bundy, he was in a lot of my YouTube videos. Probably 8, 9 years ago, and I could do anything with Bundy, whatever, but. And he'd just, if I'm talking to the camera, I'd be sitting on him and he'd be just sitting there. He's not wandering off or whatever. And I'd have some people comment, shut down. I'm like, what? And you have enough of those types of comments, you kind of get like, well, I wonder what they're talking about. And so you've got to be able to let that in. They weren't saying, you're an idiot, you're a bad person. It wasn't a judgment of me. It was just a comment about, say Bundy. And so, yeah, probably things like that, enough of those sorts of things. They weren't accusations, they were kind of comments. But that being said, back when we first moved back from Australia in the end of 2010, I had a warm blood stay, and that was probably some of the first videos I put out on YouTube, this warm blood stay that I started. And there was one video I put out that's called Groundwork Basics with a Warm Blood Stay or something around that. And going back and looking at that, I can look at it to this day and watch the whole, it's not how I train him, it's how he ended up. And his ears are working, his eyes are working, I'd be quite happy to have a horse in that state right now. I think I just get there a different way now. But looking back at him, I'm like, I would not be ashamed to show anybody that video. I mean, I think he looks really good. It's surprisingly good, actually. I hadn't looked at it in 5 or 6 years or whatever. And here recently I went back and I wonder how screwed up I had these horses back then. And I watched that video. I'm like, I was actually surprised. I was
Cringing?
I wasn't cringing, but I was planning on picking myself to pieces like, oh yeah, I see that bit now, and I see that bit. And I watched the whole thing. I'm like, I don't have anything to plan about there. So, but yeah, probably as far as detractors, it would be, saying that a horse looked a bit shut down. I think they were kind of functionally in very, very functionally in some sort of low level dorsal tone, but they weren't shut down as in unusable. But yeah, that's probably the biggest one. And then sometimes analogies I would use on social media posts would kind of hit people's sore spots, and I probably wasn't as aware of how triggering some things can be for people, or if I was, I couldn't give a shit at the time if it did. And now I'm a little more aware that there's some things you don't want to use as an analogy.
Well, when you were talking about looking at that old video, it made me think, I think that what's really changed a lot for you is maybe not so much your skill level, but being able to encompass a bigger view of possibilities with horses and come from a different, more clear place, not only for yourself, but that you could relate to people. Because I think a lot of a lot of trainers, even trainers that we think are really heavy-handed or, not that in touch, the horses respond to. And I think that's because they have developed something that they don't realize that they developed, right? They developed a way of being jacked into like horse language almost. And I think that part of your journey has been uncovering that and actually putting a spotlight on it and making it part of the whole process.
Yeah, probably the big thing, I used to focus on teaching people techniques, I guess. And for some people it worked, for some people it didn't. And I realize now that the energy and the intention behind those techniques makes a huge difference. So these days I'm probably a little more interested in helping people really be in their own bodies and think about, the intention behind why they do things rather than just the doing of it.
Well, you have talked a lot about for yourself feeling like you have been shut out of your emotional response to things for a good deal of your life. And so I wanted to ask you, we joke about, and you have joked on your podcast about this idea, because when you first start looking at yourself from the lens of like, what do I need to like really see and validate and maybe shift in myself to grow, you the first thing we go back to is our childhood, right? And we would joke about, oh, so many people say, I have no delusion about this myself, but so many people say, I had a great childhood.
Yeah,
Perfect
you
childhood.
you have no delusions about it because yours was pretty blatantly dysfunctional.
Yeah.
It's
Well, it
when you
was a
have
lot.
this when you have this subtly dysfunctional, then it can be a bit of a surprise that it wasn't the perfect childhood.
Well, and and the thing is that even if we took out dysfunctional and we on paper went to somebody that we would go, that is a really healthy family, right? That is a really healthy family. Those kids grew up in a really healthy environment. That does not stop anyone from having parts of their program, their subconscious program, that don't really work for them. So it could be anything. It could be from, parents bickering. Maybe they bickered, like they never fought really, but like they bickered. And now your subconscious has the belief that you don't know is in there, that to be in a relationship as an adult means you bicker. And so you
Can I
constantly
interrupt for a
on that.
second?
Yeah.
Dr. Julia just commented there's a difference between overtly dysfunctional and normalized dysfunction. And that, if anybody's ever read Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, like such a good book, talking about normalized dysfunction, how society is dysfunctional, but it's so normalized that we think it's normal, but our normal is not good. Sorry to interrupt, but
No, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of times we don't see it, and we think that, we didn't have any, and we look for the big T traumas, right? We look for like, I didn't have some huge car accident where I had to be pried out of a car, or I wasn't beaten by my parents, I was never assaulted. But what I find is that, and the science supports this, is that the brain has the ability to recognize that those are big things, right? The brain goes, oh, that was a big thing that happened, that was a big trauma, and the brain has all these ways to cope with it, but you're not under any delusion that that wasn't a big deal. It's the little things that really are the splinters that slide into the psyche. Like when you got yelled at and made to look stupid by your teacher in second grade. And that moment created this fear and lens in you that every situation after that, suddenly you were like, oh my God, I'm stupid. I didn't know I was stupid. People look at me and they see stupid. I didn't know that. And how painful that is. And now every situation you're in going forward, you have a lens that is scanning that situation to plug in to that confirmation bias that you are stupid. So if people don't understand what you're saying and they're looking at you a little confused, that's not just, oh, they don't understand, let me figure out how to say this better. It's, oh my God, look, they see me for so stupid. Like I'm being stupid. Those people whispering over there after I just talked or shared in this meeting, they're whispering about how dumb my idea was. Everything validates. So then you can never even make a mistake. Like that's part of life, because every mistake is just more validation that you're stupid. So when people say, I had the best childhood, my response is always, we're not digging through your childhood to be able to blame people or to, crucify your parents. They're just normal humans too, with their own things. What we're here to do is to find out what was happening in your environment and how it created your operating system and your lens, so that we can see what is there that you didn't choose, and how do we change that thing that's actually, as an adult, working against you rather than for you. So that leads me to one of the things that I feel like I don't know a lot about you, because we haven't really had those conversations, is what was it like growing up for you? Because I know that your dad was very involved in, like, I think rodeo and horses, and it was just a really different time. And I do want to say, one of the things that I think that's becoming lost in cancel culture is the ability to understand that things weren't always the way they are today. And that was permeated through everything. People, like, we're evolving as humans. And there's a lot of ways that we didn't do things right. We did things horribly, but it was a different time. And to take what we know now and use it as a lens to cast back and then shame and demonize people, that's not helpful. That's not growth. So having the humility to understand that you can't know what it's like to have grown up in rural Australia in the 1970s, or what it was like for your father when he was growing up. So I'm curious to know what it was like for you.
I had the perfect childhood, Your Honor.
Not getting away with that.
No, I mean, all of it, I would say almost all of our needs were met. But the ones that weren't, so we were physically safe, we were fed, we were clothed. There was no violence, there was no alcohol, there was no drugs, there was none of that stuff. But there was no emotional support. So pretty much in our family, we didn't have emotions. Like, you can't yell too loud. Go outside if you're going to yell. There's no loud noises. Don't bang a door, you'll be in trouble. There's no crying. There's no, you don't, you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to really show your emotions. You're not allowed to show fear. You're not allowed to, I was going to say you're not allowed to show grief, or you don't show grief. I had a friend of mine who, and he wasn't a close friend because he didn't live near us, but when I'd see him at horse shows, we'd get a lot of horse shows. I'd befriend him at horse shows. They probably lived a couple of hours from us on a farm, a ranch, and his dad was cutting down a tree one day, and the tree fell on him and killed him. And I think I was 12, and Ben I think was the same age as me. Maybe he's a year younger than me. But anyway, I remember when we heard the news, and I don't know if it was right when we heard the news or a day later or something, but for some reason I was in Mum and Dad's bedroom, and they were getting ready to go somewhere. But I was sitting on the end of the bed, and I said something about Ben, and then I started crying, and Mum just turned to me. She said, "Well, no, he's crying about it. He's dead." That was the culture about emotions, but my parents didn't ever talk about their parents either. I didn't ever know my mum's parents. They were passed away. I don't know if it was before I was born, but the little bit I can, and she never talked about it, but a little bit I can piece together is her father was a violent alcoholic. And then my father, he was one of 16 kids. And I only learnt this in the last couple of years, that they lived probably about 20 miles out of town on a farm. But when he was in the 5th grade, I think, he moved to town to live with my grandfather's sister, because him and his father weren't getting along at all. And I think he did part of the 5th grade in town and then moved back out to the farm, and then him and his brother got sent out on the road. So out on the road would mean, has anybody ever seen the movie Australia with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman? So Hugh Jackman's character was called the drover. So a drover in Australia is someone who you would hire if you were a landowner and you had either cattle or sheep, but there's a drought and there's no, you can't afford to feed them. This person basically takes your cattle or your sheep out and you move them along the sides of the highway, and they eat the grass on the sides of the highway. And so you might be gone for 3 months. So Dad was I guess he was in the 5th grade, however old you are in the 5th grade. So he got sent out with I think it was a wagon, a horse, 2 dogs, and a herd of sheep, and some tins of, I don't know, whatever, and went out doing that for, I don't know how long. So he's probably 10 or 11 or something like that, and never went back to school. But if you think about both my parents' upbringings, there's a lot of tough stuff there that they didn't work through, didn't know that was a possibility. And so I think it wasn't that it wasn't that I think they made a decision, we're not going to have emotions in our houses. Like, there was so much stuff there they probably couldn't they know that they didn't want to open Pandora's box, because out it would come, sort of a thing. So there's no blame for them not, and I don't think anybody else did at the time really know about how to talk about emotions or whatever. But yeah, we're very your emotions weren't validated. You either had the stop crying or give you something to cry about, sort of a thing. Or I remember when I was little, if you cried, oh, you were tired, you need to go to bed. Mm-hmm. Crying, being tired was a very good. I remember one time. So it was a 1,200-acre farm, and I remember I was little in the kitchen, and Dad was somewhere on the tractor doing something. He hadn't come home for lunch, and Mum was. I seem to recall Mum was worried about he's had an accident or whatever. And I remember she started to cry, and I must have said, "You okay?" or "What's wrong?" whatever. And she said, "Oh, I'm just tired." So that was the excuse for, that was the excuse for, if you'd hurt yourself, it was just toughen up. But if you were probably crying for an emotional reason, you were just tired. So that was apart from that, like I don't know how many needs you have,
Mhm.
all the needs were met except the emotional ones.
Which is huge.
Oh, yeah.
I will say, and it may be the case with your parents, I see a lot in when you look at the ancestral trauma in a family line, that even though it's still being passed down, every generation does a little bit better.
Oh, yeah. Thinking about my parents' upbringing and whatever they were hiding from, and then how they treated us, they were amazing.
Right.
And
To them, we're killing it, right? Look
yeah,
at
they
us, we're
did things
killing it with our
differently.
kids.
Yeah, yeah. There's no blame at all. But I think everybody's parents did the best they could with the knowledge they had at the time. Yeah, there's no blame there, but that does not mean all the needs were met. And and unraveling that's been, part of the journey.
I have a family joke because my aunt, I mean, she laughs so hard, she has tears coming down when I tell these stories, but like, you would get yelled at and in trouble if you got hurt, right? Because she didn't want you to get hurt. So if you got hurt, damn it, one of you get over here. It's like you're crying because you just got hurt and now you're in trouble for getting hurt.
Right. Yeah, that's the stop crying and give you something to cry about sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, it's a little different because that's a threat. Hers was just, she was immediately over threshold because you got hurt and, and what is wrong? What is happening? I think that what message you get when you grow up in a house where emotions are not understood and are not welcome, they're not comfortable for people to deal with. There is a unconscious shaming that happens of to cry is shameful. Think about it. Most of the times when our parents or with my grandparents, like if they were upset about something, everybody went in their bedroom, you went in another room, you closed the door, you didn't tell anybody why, you didn't tell the kids what was happening. You said, I'm just tired, or you said something else. But as kids, we know that something's going on. Like we feel it in our energy, we know, but nobody's telling us. There's this big mystery. And so that goes against nature. And it goes against the fact that we are living, feeling, breathing, emotional beings. Emotion goes into our intelligence to be able to make decisions. It's such a part of our being. So when you grow up with the message and the learning that emotions are shameful, or we just don't do them, we just don't do them, you've cut yourself off from a piece of yourself that is really vital to you as being a whole human. And if you look at, because I know that you've done IFS, you've done internal family systems, and what they talk about in that view is that what happens was there were times when you were a kid, and maybe one of those times was what you were talking about with your friend's father dying and you having an emotional reaction. There are these moments you didn't come into the world with this understanding that emotions aren't allowed or they're not wanted, but you're wide open as a little kid. And so you might not even remember when they happen, but there's moments when you're wide open and you're bringing that to a parent and you get shut down. And the shutdown is wildly painful. It's super painful to a little kid who's wide open. And in that moment, a manager gets formed, because the idea with IFS is we have managers, firefighters, and exiles. So the part of you that was wide open, That's now the exile. We can't trust that part, that silly part that wants love and acceptance and to feel things. We're going to put that away. And now this manager gets formed, and the manager says, don't be stupid. Why are you doing that? Why nobody wants to hear that? Just be quiet. Just do what you're told. You know, that's sissy stuff, whatever it is, this very harsh voice, because to the mind, you just did something that created great pain. Great pain leads to death. And the mind's only real goal is to keep you alive, not necessarily mentally healthy, but alive. And physical and emotional pain, it doesn't differentiate between the two. Pain is pain. So now you've got that first voice in the head that's going, don't be stupid, don't be stupid. And those managers, they're brilliant in helping a child survive the environment that it's in and adapt. But once we leave childhood and we become adults, they don't work so great because we don't need them anymore, because now we have dominion over our life. We have autonomy. We're not in a situation where we really don't have any power. So I think that's really part of this process and this life journey, is to the practice of unraveling, the practice of seeing, the practice of shifting those managers and those beliefs, because we don't need them anymore. And what happens is it builds a wall. We built this wall, and everything that we want is on the other side of the wall. But the walls there was created to protect us. But we can't be protected and have connection and engaged at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yes, but
It, give
I
it
want
to
to
me.
point. I want to point out that on the podcast I had this amazing human named Christine Dixon one time, and she said this line that kind of made me pause. But it was about, if you look at it from the point of view that you signed on for this journey, and I'm only paraphrasing you here, but you signed up for this journey, and all those things that happened to you on the way were things for you to work on in this iteration. And if you think about all the amazing stuff that's happening in my life at the moment, wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had these things to unravel, because I wouldn't be doing the things I'm doing. I wouldn't be talking about the things I'm talking about. I wouldn't be interested in the people I'm interested in. So, you have to understand that, yes, things weren't good, whatever, but you also have to kind of look at it and go, and that, they happen for a reason. And like you, like that person on the podcast, that Christine Dixon lady, she said that may be very hard for people who have had very severe trauma. But she said something about, you have a different perspective of it if you think you signed up for it, rather than it, you think about it happened for you, not happened to you. I think that's what she said. I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, and I think that also fits into this, because it is the unpacking of everything that you are here to transcend, right? That you are here to utilize, that you are here to overcome. And there's the spiritual aspect of it, and then there's the more physical, like the way the mind works, the way the nervous system works. And understanding both, I think, gives you like the double powers. And I think that's what's been such a big part of your journey and why it's resonated with people, because you do kind of bring in both. So what would you say on this journey has been the biggest moments, like kind of shifts that you've had? Like what has happened or what have you done or what have you engaged in that you feel like that was a turning point? Because I think we have a lot of them, but I'm curious about yours.
There's been a number of them. One was, most of the people have heard the story of Sherlock, a horse that we bought that kind of got me started on this journey, because the things I wanted to help him with, I couldn't help him with the knowledge I had. So he kind of made me step back and think, well, what else is there? But you mentioned Dr. Will Siu before, that you introduced me to, and he is a psychedelic assisted therapist. And I think psychedelics have been a big part of it. And, I grew up in the drugs are bad, people who take drugs are bad people sort of mentality. And how I started with psychedelics, with a healing journey, was totally not by chance, but I wasn't looking for it. 2018, I'd spent the whole year in therapy, both group and individual therapy. So twice a week, I was driving 45 minutes one way to go to therapy. I mean, and it was in the mornings I would go to the therapy, which is afternoons in Wales. So I remember I would spend a lot of time talking to Kathy Price while driving up there. Anyway, I didn't get anywhere. The first year of doing that, I really didn't get. I learned a lot of things, but I didn't really get anywhere as far as like emotions. And I was in Australia late that year, or early probably January the next year, driving around, and I was listening to a podcast by Dave Asprey, I think it was, the Bulletproof Coffee guy. And he was saying there's a guy in Silicon Valley it was an audiobook actually, but he said this guy will spin off your stem cells, pull fat out of you, spin off your stem cells and inject them into your joints for joint problems. Oh, yeah. But then he said, there's also this other thing that he will do, which is he will pull fat out, you spin off your stem cells and inject them into your vagus nerve, and he will give you a complete emotional reset back to factory settings. And it's called a stellate ganglion block. And so when I got back, I was in Australia at the time, but when I got back from there, I looked up the guy. He was in Silicon Valley. He's about 45 minutes away. It's the same distance as I was driving to therapy, but this is going to be I'm going to go up there. This guy's going to inject me with this stuff, and boom, no more work. And the first thing towards that process is you've got to make an appointment with him, and you do a phone consult for an hour. And he asked me all sorts of questions, and I told him I wanted to do this stellate ganglion block thing. And he said, well, from what you've told me, that's not going to work for you. There's something else I'm going to do for you. Come in, but I won't do that, but I can help you, but there's something else I'm going to do. I'm like, okay. So I made an appointment, went up there, and he hooked me up to an IV of NAD for about 4.5 hours. So NAD is something to do with your brain, heart, gut, neural pathway, especially the gut part of it. And then he hooked me up to an IV of ketamine. He gave me a ketamine trip. I didn't say, hey, I want to do some psychedelics. He hooked me up to a ketamine, IV of ketamine for about 20 minutes. And I didn't see any entities or anything. It was just all this. It was like I was on a kaleidoscopic roller coaster. It was like, whoa, all these most vivid colors or whatever. And he said, so what'll happen is your emotions will go offline for about 8 hours, and then it'll kick in. So that was like 4 o'clock one afternoon. So the next morning when I woke up, which is about 14 hours later, Robin said to me, any different? And I'm like, nope, it was another bust, 12 months of 2 types of therapy didn't do anything, and this didn't do anything either. And so that afternoon, I was going to fly to Washington State to a horse expo. So I was in San Jose Airport. So this is 24 hours after the thing. And I'm sitting in the airport, and all of a sudden, I felt this energy in my midsection. So up until this point in time, I'd felt heartbreak, being in love up here in my heart, and fear and dread in the pit of my stomach, and pretty much nothing in the middle. And the heartbreak and being in love sort of thing, I'd always been a bit of a romantic, and I realize now why, because I got feedback from that. I've never been competitive. winning, losing didn't really do anything because I got no feedback from my body. I always wondered why people were like so competitive. I didn't realize that people have this other feedback. Anyway, so I felt this thing in my solar plexus, and I kind of felt like Sigourney Weaver and Alien. There was this energy in there moving around, and when I spoke to people, it moved here and there. And I went to this horse expo, and as I interacted with people and horses, this thing would move around. And like that, I'd never felt that before in my entire life. Like there's not a class in school called emotions. And they say, okay, so if your emotions work like they should, you should have this energy in your body. And sometimes it's really painful and sometimes it feels really good and it moves, you don't know that. And one of the strange things that happened that weekend, I was sitting at the booth at this horse expo, and there was a lady walking around with a cat on a harness on a leash. And she walked past my booth, and that cat took one look at me, made a beeline for me, jumped up on the table, jumped into my lap, and sucked up against my solar plexus. And so the lady almost, follows the cat over, and she had one of those retractable leashes. And so we start chatting, and I said, so your cat does this all the time? She goes, my cat's never done this in entire life. Just ran over to someone and jumped in their lap. And so from the feelings I was having, those sensations I was having in my torso that I'd never experienced in my entire life before, plus this cat, made me think, okay, there's something to psychedelics. There's something's going on here that's never gone on before. And so then since then I've probably done 5 or 6 different psychedelics, only in healing settings. And the story I'd been told in my life, drugs are bad, stay away from drugs, whatever. So I definitely wouldn't have gone looking for them. But I had this, and the guy in Silicon Valley is a doctor. And so a doctor gave me a ketamine trip that made me probably feel emotions for the first time I hadn't ever felt, different ones that I hadn't ever felt before. So that was probably a turning point. And I think that the healing journeys and psychedelics I've done since have all, added up to it. But I would say probably a big turning point was, another turning point was last year when I went to Argentina and did the Gaucho Derby. I probably got more out of that than any of the psychedelic journeys. Probably a longer lasting change. And it's kind of like you've almost got to get to something that'll kind of bring you to your knees sort of thing. Mm-hmm. To have a bit of a change. But yeah, I'd say, the Sherlock the horse kind of got me started. Brené Brown, reading the Brené Brown book, really, she's the one that led me to the therapy in the first place. I've got a funny therapy story. Oh God, I've got a funny therapy story. I don't know if I've ever told anybody this story. So I've been going the wrong type of therapy. Okay. I was going to dialectical behavior therapy, which was originally created, I think, for highly suicidal adults, but now they use it for people with emotional dysregulation. A year of that didn't help me because I didn't have any emotions.
Not access to them anyway, right?
Yeah, they weren't happening. So the work was for when they're happening and how to control them. Yeah. And so I said I don't think and reading what's his name? 10% Happier guy, Dan Harris's book. He talked about how he got prescribed SSRIs because he was depressed, and the depressive symptoms he had, I had the same ones. I'm like, maybe it's depression. And the therapist I'm seeing is not a psychiatrist who can prescribe things. So I thought, I think I need to go and see a psychiatrist instead of a psychologist, I think. So I just said, okay, I'm going to do something different. And so I just look up in the phone book, psychiatrist. And so I call this number and I say, I want to make an appointment, come in, and they couldn't fit me until like 4 months away. Okay. So I go there and they asked me, who referred you? Like, nobody referred me. And that was kind of a stilted conversation. I couldn't figure out why it was weird. Anyway, so I go there and I can't find the place because all I can find is this like government looking office sort of a thing, the department of something. So I go in there and I walk up and I say, I got an appointment today. And they say, okay, can you fill this out? And a lot of the questions, I didn't get why they were asking me these questions of this intake form. And they're sitting in the waiting room, and the conversation between the other people, they're like, "Oh yeah, I got out of jail and I was on the run, and and then it's all this jail talk, and I don't get it." And then I take the thing back up, and all of a sudden I realize this: oh, I'm in a court-appointed mental health facility. This is I wanted a little Jewish guy with wire-rimmed glasses and grey hair. Okay, and that's who I thought I was calling. I just called a number in the phone book that said about psychiatrists. So by this point in time, I realized, oh, I'm in the wrong place. Okay. And so when they call my name, the therapist or whatever comes out and introduces himself, and this is she's shadowing me for the day or whatever. So we're walking down the hall, and we sit down, and she starts asking me questions, and stupid me, I look across the desk, I go, no, I'm in the wrong place. I'm not supposed to be here. They're like, yeah, yeah. And the more I try to tell them that I shouldn't be there, the more they're like, everybody says that.
You almost got locked up.
Oh, well, that's the thing. I was going to do a runner. I'm like, I'm just going to go, I'm in the wrong place. Screw it. I'm out of here. And I thought, no, I'll be running across the paved parking lot, and they are going to crash tackle me and put me in a friggin' straitjacket, put cuffs on me, and actually throw me in a jail cell. And I kept saying, no, I'm in the wrong place. And they're like, no.
Delusional. He's delusional.
And they're like, no. And I'm like, yes, but can you just listen to me? They're like, no. And it went back and forth for half an hour. And I'm like, can I just tell you my story, please? And they're like, they've heard this shit before, haven't they? Like, everybody that comes here that the judge says to go to mental health things, they don't have a problem. And finally I get the story out, and she's like, you're right. You're in the wrong place.
Oh, they're probably still telling that story too.
But I couldn't run away because they were going to, they would blow the whistle or press the alarm button, and the guards would come out with their batons and beat the shit out of me, I don't know if I've ever told it. I totally forgot about that. But I don't know if I've ever told that story. But yeah, I was looking for a psychiatrist, but apparently that's not the psychiatrist I was looking for.
Oh my God, this is where ask more questions might come in handy.
I looked in the phone book and it said psychiatry or something, and I called the number, and that was it. Once I
That's a
walked
very
in,
literal person. Okay.
once I walked in that door, though, I was screwed.
Yeah.
But it was the conversations in the waiting room. I just couldn't figure it. Maybe I'm naive or slow or something. I just wasn't putting two together. But yeah, everybody had some sort of a broken out of jail story, or the cops raiding them or whatever. I'm thinking, well, this psychiatrist here, he must be really good. He must really deal with like people with real problems. He can help me. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a little Jewish guy with wire-rimmed glasses and grey hair.
Well, I want to get back for a second to when you were talking about the role of psychedelics in your journey, because I don't know. I know I've told you some of this, but I don't know if I told you all of this. But the thing is that what might come as a surprise to people, I don't know, maybe not, is I've always been terrified of drugs that alter your perceptions of reality. I never liked to even drink alcohol to the point where I didn't feel like I was still in control. So I had studied and had been listening to and reading about all different kinds of things, from ayahuasca to MDMA. And I was fascinated by the stories of transformation in people's lives, of the healing properties when done in clinical settings, how really healing this stuff can be. I don't think it's healing in replace of doing the work, but I think it can really help the work. And listening to you talk about it on your podcast, as kind of a reluctant traveler down that road of, this wasn't a road that I would be skipping down and happy because I want to do drugs, but because I am, though, curious. And I think it normalized it for me in a way, like it made it less scary. And which led to there was things in my own life that I felt like I was kind of stuck in. And it was stuck in around giving up, letting go of the fear of abandonment, and how that just really colored so many different areas of my life, with trusting people, with being able to get close to people and have intimacy in all my relationships, being able to trust myself. That really came back to like also not being able to, feeling like I'm not able to trust myself, that I can choose, I cannot give myself away, right? I won't go into things and then go, oh crap, now I'm in this relationship with this friend or this partner and I can't find myself again. So it had been suggested to me that a clinical MDMA session might be really helpful. And I toyed with that idea for a while. I really played with it for a while. And then finally, I booked it with these people. And so if you know how terrified I was, like the only people that I would trust are this woman who's was trained in psychology. She also has been doing this for over 30 years. I mean, she had to have all of these, different ways of validating that she was safe. And so I booked with her, and it was months out, and she had me do these things like write down my dreams, and there's a lot. I love the areas where we don't know why they work. We don't know how this works, right? There's a spiritual or an energetic component that can't be explained, but it's definitely part of the process. And I went there. They're up in the mountains, and that, you know, I'm just going to run through that day, the day that we actually did it, because you meet before, the day before, you stay in a little cabin, you kind of talk about the intention, and then the next morning, she sends you out on this trail to walk, and at the top of the hill, there's a picnic table, and you sit down at the picnic table, and you really get clear on what you are doing this for, and then you walk back down, and you take the medicine and you have the journey. And I walked up and I sat down on this picnic table, and there was a prey mantis sitting next to me. And I didn't notice. And he was facing away from me, but his little alien head was like turned all the way around, looking me right in the face. So obviously I said hello and started talking to him. And then I sat there and did my intention, and then he was still looking at me, and I said, okay, well, thanks for sitting with me. And he literally turned around and walked away, like we were done. And so I walked back down to the cabin. I took the medicine, and I got tucked into this bed with, the face mask on, covering my eyes. And Warwick, you knew that I was doing this. I told you I was doing this. And Will knew I was doing this. And not many other people did. I didn't really tell anybody. I did tell my kids. And on my way, you sent me a text. And you said, good luck with everything. And it was just, but you said, lean in. And you put like 20 exclamation points after lean in. And all of the talk they had done with Will, one of the things that he said always was, you just trust the medicine, right? The medicine, the psychedelic, it knows what you need. Trust that. So I'm laying in this bed, and I have to tell you, I experienced relaxation like you have never experienced in your life, because as the MDMA starts to work, it felt like little lapping waves of like deeper relaxation and a little lapping wave of deeper relaxation, to the point where it's like, wow, like I never realized how much tension is in the body until right now, when I feel like I'm just floating on this bed. But then the waves started getting bigger and bigger. And I started to get afraid. And the voices in my head started. And I can only relay it as like the angel and the devil, right? Like it was that kind. Like one was literally on one shoulder and one was on the other. And one's going, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this. And the other one's just like cackling and laughing and going, too late now, like no getting out of it. And then the other voice is going, you're going to die. You're going to die here. And the fear, my heart is like racing, and it's like, you're going to have a heart attack. You're going to have a heart attack up on this stupid mountain with this woman who can't carry your body down the hill to get you to a hospital. And your children are going to find out that their mother died because she went to do drugs with some hippies in the hills. And you didn't have to do it. You didn't have to do this. You could have lived your life and you could have not done this. And then the other voice says, do you actually think that after 30 years of doing this, you're going to be the first person that dies up here? So these are the conversations going on in my head. And the waves are getting bigger and bigger. And I don't think, and I've been in really scary situations. I don't think I have ever felt panic like this, that was breathing on the back of my neck. And the thought was, if I let this get me, I'm done. Like, I felt like I would just start running around the room yelling, or like I would lose myself. And so, and then your words and Will's words became a mantra that I just grabbed onto. Trust the medicine, lean in. Trust the medicine, lean in. And I almost like when you meditate, I just focused on saying that over and over and over again. And then suddenly, boom, I was on the other side. And I think one of the biggest things about even doing that at all was facing my fear of death, my fear of being out of control, facing my fear. And I had this amazing experience. You lose track of time. Apparently for 2 hours, I didn't say anything. I was just like, I was flying. I was a hawk, I think, like just going straight up, flying so fast and with the wind that the tears were running down my eyes. And I was just going up and up and up. And then I came down in the middle of this circle. It was like a circle, but there was only people on half of the circle, and it was these Native American women. And they were laughing and smiling, and they started kissing my face and saying, "We've been waiting for you for so long." And they start laughing, going, "You were so scared. You were so scared." And they're laughing, and it was like coming home. And I got, I won't have enough time to go into all this, but what I'll tell you is that the feeling of being loved and the feeling of forgiveness were the two of the biggest feelings that I had in that. And the family members that popped up, and friends. There was family members and friends in bubbles at one point. Like when you blow bubbles, like they're floating around in these bubbles. And it was surprising to me who showed up and who didn't. But within those bubbles, I saw the person, right? And these were people that I had felt abandonment around. And the person's in there and they're like talking, like they're in this bubble, like they're talking and they're doing all these things and they're moving around. And the knowing was that, oh, it's got nothing to do with me. Like that had nothing to do with me. They're in their own world. And it wasn't personal, it was their stuff. And I just forgave them. Like it wasn't even a thing anymore. And the idea of all of this work, when you really get into the work on yourself, of it being both happening in a spiritual realm and in the physical, here's the crazy part. Now, where Warwick comes into this is that Warwick and Robin, this was in Northern California happening, and Warwick and Robin had a cabin in Tahoe, and they were going to be staying there. And when they found out I would be up there, they invited me to come stay for the night. And honestly, I swear that was the universe looking out for me, because I couldn't have been around two more perfect, supportive, generous people coming out of this than Warwick and Robin. I remember Warwick was making us breakfast, and I was telling the story of my experience, and he's making breakfast, and he kept looking over with really big eyes, and then he kept looking over with really, like, he was like following like, I think he was having a visceral response to everything that I was relaying. Do you remember that?
I do.
So at the end of that, when I flew home, and I landed in LAX. If anyone's been to LAX, it's one of the biggest airports in the world. I have never in my life of living 20 plus years in LA run into anyone at LAX. But I walked out of baggage claim onto the sidewalk. And I'm standing there, and you're still a little bit in a daze. Like, it takes days for the medicine to really kind of wear off. So I'm still in a little bit of a daze, and I'm just kind of checked out. And then I'm like, wait, why am I standing here in the middle of the sidewalk with people walking around me? And I turn to my right, and there is my cousin's husband, who was in one of the bubbles that I had just experienced, who I had not seen or spoken to in 17 years.
Of course he was.
Of course he was. Like, what? The idea of the physical world underlining in that way what I had just experienced. I still get chills. I still, it's so wild. And I came home, and literally the next morning I went outside to let the chickens out of their coop, and right in front of the chicken coop was a dead praying mantis. And when I looked, I was like, okay, what is the significance of a praying mantis? And it said in some Native American cultures, a praying mantis is a guide for a spiritual journey. So I wanted you to know, I wanted to tell you how, in so many real ways, your podcast and your journey is woven into my own. And I can't imagine the countless numbers of other people who have benefited and been influenced by your courage in sharing so much with everyone.
Well, I feel the same way about you, because, it was after hearing your story about that I went and did the same thing with that lady's husband. And it was funny that you said you had the, I want to do this, I don't want to do this sort of thing. So when the husband sent me for a walk, and Will had told me that he said the MDMA is the best thing for you. He says it turns off your amygdala, so there's no fear, and it turns off your judgment. So whatever comes up, you're not afraid of it, and you also don't judge it. You just get to work through it. And so I kind of knew this was, I'm going to face the things that I haven't been able to face, and and so he sent me for the same walk. I didn't see a praying mantis, but he sent me for the same walk, and then I was going to come back, and then I was going to do the medicine and spend the day on the bed, And as I walked past my truck, I looked at that and I thought, I could just get in and drive off right now. I could just, and I really had thought about, can't do this. I'm going to get in the truck. I'm going to run away from this. Like all the hard things I've run away from before in life. And then there was the, no, you can do it. But there was certainly the, oh God, I wanted to get in that truck and run away because I knew this was going to be I was going to have to face the things that I didn't want to face. And, and of course, as you know, it just looks after you.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I definitely wanted to get in that truck and go, leave, flee, run away.
Well, it is scary. It's the unknown. And I feel like I have so much respect for anybody, for anyone who is willing to look in the mirror, who is willing to take down their guard, to really work on themselves and be accountable. And one of the things, I recently I started doing interviews with people that I had worked with to get feedback on what it was like to work together. And one of the things that was kind of mind-blowing was hearing about how the work not only affected them, but it affected their partner, it affected their families, one person said their kids, friends, and so I think that if we, I love the telepathy tapes and the whole message that podcast has, which is the idea that our thoughts carry energy. And if we thought about everything we do being that ripple that goes out into the world, like everything we do, the way we talk to the cashier at the food store, the way we treat our animals or speak to our friends or any of it is either creating the world that we want to see or is feeding the world we don't. And I think right now, especially, is a really good time to challenge ourselves with no matter what the outer world is, what's happening in the outer world, what we see or what's being said. Can we do the inner work of holding the vision and the belief that what we want the world to be, what is already exists, not as a bypass of pretending things aren't happening, but realizing that we're creators and that is super important. And I think that your platform of your podcast really feeds into that, really supports it.
Yeah, I've just been very fortunate just to have, the right people came along at the right time. I think about the Nashon Cook quote that popped up. I'm like, I want to get that guy on the podcast, and then think about, everybody like that. The thing is, I just feel like I know how to surrender to the flow, and then the right people show up at the right time.
So I know we're at the end. Do you have like 5 minutes?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do a few minutes. So I wanted to ask, does anybody, you know what, I don't know if I can see everybody with this, but does anybody have a question of Warwick or any question that you wanted to ask before we wrap this up? You can even type it in the chat if you want. Oh, I love Lucy. I love Lucy. That's funny. I know that these were, hi Lucy. I know that these were deep conversations. And I said to work, I said, you know, it's funny. The idea of First Fridays is to be interactive. But like when Kathy and I met the last time, so we got so deep into it, we never really asked anybody any questions till the very end, and then we had already melted everyone's brain, so there was really nothing else to talk about. So so thank you to everybody. I know that you guys have been writing so much in the chat, and I am looking forward to reading it all, because my ADD won't let me read it and still be able to focus on what Warwick's saying at the same time. I tried once and then I was like, wait, what did he say? Where are we? Oh, wait, okay, catch up. So thank you, Warwick. I mean, honestly, I respect you so much. And you know, I know that you would have come on here 2 years ago, but I felt like I had to practice and get better at this before extending that invitation. And I'm so happy you came. And anytime I get to talk to you is a good time. So I'll try to come up with more embarrassing things to like bring you on and talk about, like what you said at a clinic 7 years ago.
You know, the thing is, they're not embarrassing. I said, that was, you know, that was then, this is now, whatever. But
Yeah.
but I feel the same way about you. I feel like Rob and I both feel like we're blessed to have you and a lot of these other people we know and here in our lives too.
Oh, well, this has created a whole other life for me, like that's bloomed out of this. And you know what? One thing too is that you and Robin are seriously the best kind of friends, because I love friends that you cannot talk to them for 6 months and you pick up the phone and it's like not a day has gone by and you're just in it, right? Because I don't know, for whatever reason, that's just the way I can do it. That's the way I do friendships. I don't, if people don't call me, I don't think, why aren't they calling me? Or like, you know, I don't go down that road. I know that we're all busy. So it's a real connection, and I'm really grateful for that. So maybe we'll have you back on another time.
I would love to come back, and there's plenty more to talk about.
Yes, there is. I know I have all my notes. I'm like, I didn't get to have this stuff, but thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for creating this with me. And Work, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that's coming up for you that you want to share with us? I know that you have a documentary coming out that's being worked on.
Well, it's not coming out, it's being worked on, but yeah, we have a filmmaker. I keep saying he's from Switzerland. He was from Switzerland when I first met him. Now he lives in Mallorca, Spain, but he came to the summit last year and he is wanting to do a documentary about whatever the hell this whole thing is. You know, I'm a part of it, but I'm not the documentary. It's more about it's kind of like this. It's like all the things that have come together because of the podcast or what I'm up to. And they're kind of focusing on Emily Kay's daughter and Jordana Annawalt and Jessica White Plume and I think Steve Peters. You know, it's going to be, so we've got the indigenous wisdom, the earth wisdom part, the animal wisdom from Emily, and then there's the scientific part from Steve Peters, but also the horse part of that too. But it's called Rekindle. It's just about if you think about the outcome of all these connections is trying to get people to be more in touch with our, like indigenous wisdom or earth wisdom, universal wisdom, whatever. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting project. It's only in its infancy now, but we're going to go to Emily's place here in August in Sweden and film some stuff. And then Sean's going to come out for the summit, which is now turned to a summit retreat. And then I guess we'll be going to visit Jess in North Dakota. And then we'll go to Oregon to visit Jordana. And we'll probably go to Steve's as well.
Oh, wow. So, okay. For some reason, yeah, no, that makes sense. So there's a website, because I've seen some of the trailers and they're absolutely stunning. I mean, the way he's filming
The
this.
guy's very, very artistic. And
What is
yeah,
the website?
sorry?
Their website?
I think it's rekindledocumentary.com.
Or, yeah, Rekindle, or the movie? Rekindle
I
documentary?
think it's Rekindle Documentary because there is a my mouse is frozen, so sorry I can't get to it right now. That's why I was
That's
trying to do
okay.
these
I'm
things.
going to look it
My
up.
mouse is frozen, but I think it's rekindledocumentary.com.
Yes, you're right. Rekindledocumentary.com.
And he was out here for the summit last year and captured some stuff. I'm not even sure he's going to use those in the actual film because we're going to be, going to their places and seeing what they're doing. But yeah,
Wow.
it's gonna be exciting. I don't know anything about documentaries, so being on this end of it's going to be fun.
Well, you can be guaranteed that I will be cheering you on and taking in everything that comes out of all of this. So thanks again. I mean, is there any last words?
I could have a lot of last words.
Put you on the spot.
Just letting go of control and for me, letting go of control and allow the universe to show me the way kind of is what's got me here. So I'm pretty committed to that.
The surrender.
It's like the medicine, just surrender.
Just surrender.
Just lean into it.
Lean in. Lean in.
Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point.
Yes,
Exclamation point.
20 exclamation points. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Warwick. And this has been a real honor and pleasure. And till next time.
Yeah, likewise. It's been an honor. Thanks for having me on, and thanks you guys. Good seeing your smiling faces again. And my mouse is not working, so I can't click out of here. So
I'll do it.
you guys will have to leave.
We've got you forever. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.